Have you ever read Boruto's manga and think, wait a minute, that makes a lot of sense, and then you look online and it seems like there are a ton of people who somehow missed the thing you think made perfect sense? Well, Boruto 2 Blue Vortex chapter 27 is doing exactly that. Fans everywhere, based on what I've been seeing, they're still trying to figure out why Sarada and Sumire are immune to Ada's omnipotence. Some people say it's because they're in love with Otsutsuki, even though that's not what we're told in the manga. Others say it's because they have special chakra, and some, like my relatives in the South like to say, bless their hearts, they think that they just have really good plot armor. But the truth, well, the answer, it is emotional, it's psychological, and it is something beautifully foreshadowed all the way back in part 1 with how subtle the writing is. So join me in today's newest Naruto Explained video, where your OBC, your original Boruto chief, is going to explain in full detail how and why Sarada and Sumire are immune to Ada's omnipotence, when she made them immune, how that power actually works, and why this entire plot point might be one of the most underrated pieces of writing in all of Boruto. I thought I did a good enough job in the chapter review explaining it, but in the 4 days since the chapter review, I've read over 100 comments legitimately of people saying they're confused about how the two girls were unaffected by Ada. So I'm going to make this both detailed and in-depth as well as super simple. So if you were confused and you find this video helpful, or you know someone who is confused, make sure to share this video with them and tell them watch all the way to the end, because by the end of this video, trust me, Ada's actions are going to make a lot of painful sense to you. Also, don't forget to check out that chapter review if you haven't already, which will be linked in the description box, as well as my new My Dress Up Darling video from my Anime Explained channel, where I discuss other anime and manga besides Naruto, which will also be linked in the description box. So in order to understand why they're immune, we have to go back over some basics, which is the biggest one of them all, omnipotence, because I still see people 2 years after omnipotence was first revealed to us, there's a lot of people that are confused. Some of this comes from people only referring to omnipotence as the memory swap, and not the fact that that charm power is also omnipotence. They are both literally the same thing. Omnipotence is basically the divine power to turn the user's desires into reality. That's the most simple explanation. If Ada wants something hard enough, emotionally, not logically, then omnipotence basically reacts and makes it reality. It bends the world, it bends memories and even human hearts to make her desire come true. It's not genjutsu, so it is not chakra-based illusion. As Momoshiki explained it in Boruto Naruto Next Generation Chapter 80, this is nothing like genjutsu at all. I still see people that try to compare this to genjutsu. This is nothing like it, because when you're under genjutsu, you can realize it and you can break out of it. With omnipotence, that ain't the case. Even Sasuke, the ultimate genjutsu breaker himself, he broke out of Tsukiyomi despite not having a Mangekyo Sharingan. Even he was able to figure out that something was wrong, that he couldn't trust his memories, yet he couldn't undo it. That should have been the final death knell for this is like genjutsu. And that's basically the point. You can't simply disrupt your chakra and walk it off like a bad Sharingan trip. Like you run into some random Uchiha, they put you under genjutsu, and then you try to mold chakra, you can't do it, so your buddy comes up, funnels some chakra into you, and then that's it. It don't work like that. Think of omnipotence as basically Ada bending reality and just having a constant autocorrect, except this is sentient. It is powered by the subconscious emotions of a teenage girl, which if you know anything about teenage girls, you know that something at their whim with how emotionally charged they are, that is something extremely dangerous and something extremely unpredictable. And I wanted to use autocorrect to explain this, because that is why Boruto tells Shikamaru when it comes to the memory aspect with the memories being swapped, that it doesn't matter how many times he gets told what omnipotence is, he's going to forget the concept, and his memories are always going to default back to Kawaki's Naruto's naturally born son. It's a walking autocorrect. You basically have to, just like when you're typing on the computer, you have to click the button that says add to dictionary. Otherwise, it is going to automatically revert back to what it believes is the correct spelling. Omnipotence does that same thing when it comes to the memory swap. Think of it like you're constantly having to click add to dictionary even after you've done it the first time. It's the same thing with the charm ability, which, as a reminder, that charm ability is more than just you see Ada and you turn into a simp. If you go back to chapter 69 of Boruto Naruto Next Generations, Amato describes it as being multiple symptoms. It can be everything from simple-minded people turning into simps. It can be people having vertigo, people having headaches, people having nausea. There are multiple symptoms when Ada's in your present, because not everyone experiences the same emotion of love. Not in the same way. Like for me personally, every time I've been in love with somebody, so in this case, I'm lucky enough to say that I've been in love twice. One is no longer here. OG subs know that she was murdered back in 2018, and then the other one just came down to the fact that I wasn't willing to stand up against certain people in my family because that individual was from a different ethnic background than I'm from, even though my family has people from multiple different ethnicities in it, because it was my uncle and at the time my mom who seemingly had issues with it. I did not take that relationship where it could have gone, and I regret that. So I give that transparency to say this. I have that warm feeling in the breastbone of my chest. It's hard to explain it, but that's the feeling I get. Feels like somebody's pressing down on my chest, and the inside of my chest is very, very warm. I don't get butterflies in the stomach like some people. I basically get butterflies in the chest. Somebody somewhere is gonna make a heartburn joke, but you get what I'm saying here. But I also want to kind of point your attention to something else. Momoshiki literally tells us that charm effect is omnipotence. The official Naruto database for what it calls Ada's the ability to beguile or beguile, however you pronounce it, human hearts and emotions, it says it is a byproduct of omnipotence. So when Ada first awakened this power long before her debut, her deepest desire, it was simple, to be loved. Omnipotence took that wish literally, rewriting everything so that everyone, everywhere, who was not an Otsutsuki or a blood relative was drawn to her and captivated. That's why Boro couldn't destroy her despite Jigen giving the orders. That is why he sealed Ada away. It wasn't loyalty, it was the manipulation from this goddess of heartbreak herself. But here's where things get very interesting. Again, she does not control omnipotence. She is merely, as Momoshiki said, the trigger. She's not the driver. Momoshiki says this in chapter 80. The power activates based on her inner desires, even when she doesn't consciously realize it, which that's basically all the time. That is the key to understanding Sarada and Sumire's immunity. That is why she says in chapter 27 of Boruto 2 Blue Vortex, I subconsciously made you guys immune. So this is where we now have to look at Ada's first misunderstanding, because what Ikimoto did here was use Ada as a vehicle to basically address the audience by going over popular fan stuff. So in chapter 27, Ada herself admits something shocking. She says that she once thought that Sarada and Sumire were immune because both girls were in love with the Otsutsuki. In this case, they were in love with Boruto. And since Otsutsuki were unaffected by her charm, she figured maybe it extended to those who love them. And that was a popular theory for a very long time. Ikimoto probably got letters about it and said, hey, that makes sense. Let me address that now. And that's why you see Ada pause and she rethinks it and she says, hey, that doesn't make sense. Because she points out there are plenty of girls in Konoha who secretly like Boruto and Kawaki. In fact, when you reread Boruto's manga, you see girls making goo-goo eyes at Kawaki, making them at Boruto. Some of the girls even called out to him and said that he was cute. In this case, I'm talking about Boruto when he's sitting on the Hokage monument. He even had a grown woman looking at him, and Sumire's like, Boruto sure is popular, isn't he? When you look at all those other girls, they all fell under the charm. Their memories were altered because omnipotence. They were affected by it. So that whole theory, Ikimoto's basically saying if you thought that they were immune because they're in love with Otsutsuki, that went out faster than Code's master plan when he got his limiters removed. And we all know how that worked out for Code. He got his ass whooped multiple times. That's when Ada drops the real truth to us. She says, hey, well, I must have subconsciously made you guys immune. And to understand what that means, I'm going to literally define subconscious. So the subconscious is the part of your mind that works below awareness. It's where your true emotions and instincts and your repressed desires live. You might not know what you want, but your actions will reflect it anyway. Great examples being, let's use a real life example. My buddy Sean, every time I've ever had a woman that I ended up asking out, my buddy Sean always knew that I was attracted to somebody before I even knew it myself, because there's just certain things I do that I'm not aware of. There's just a certain, the way he puts it, there's just a certain way that I act and I'm not made conscious that I'm doing it. Sumire literally says the same thing about Sarada. It was always obvious that Sarada liked Boruto because she was doing things subconsciously that she didn't realize it. So when Ada says that she subconsciously made them immune, what she's really saying is, I didn't realize I wanted this, but Omnipotence did, so it made it a reality. And that right there, it fits perfectly into Ada's character arc from part 1, which this just made me speed up asking about the Ada video essay that I sent off a while back, because if you're confused about this, I think that you might not fully understand Ada's character beyond the concept of love itself. And that brings me to the foreshadowing back in chapter 73 of Boruto, and just the foreshadowing in general in Boruto part 1. Back during a lot of those chapters where people complain about pacing and etc., a lot of the stuff that we're getting in Tupu Vortex now, it was all set up during the times where people were complaining, saying there's no action here, why is there all this dialogue and etc. That's why you have to read everything slowly. Go back and reread the material in volume format. That fixes a lot of the pacing issues every 4 chapters, which I know monthly manga, this is new for a lot of you guys, but that is how manga are meant to be read. You can read them issue by issue in terms of the chapter releases coming out, but they are meant to be read in tankobon fashion, which that basically means they are meant to be read 1 volume at a time. Even your weekly manga, they are meant to be read 1 volume at a time. The release does not care about short attention spans. The release does not care that you have to wait 30 days between chapters. So let's get into it, the foreshadowing itself. So when we rewind to Boruto Part 1, in particular Chapter 73, at this point, Sumire gives one of the most important monologues in this series. Looking back at it, it might be the most important piece of dialogue in all of Boruto Part 1, bigger than those blue eyes will take everything away from you. She breaks down Ada's power and her curse better than Amado or Shikamaru ever could. She basically called it a curse and not necessarily a gift. What Sumire says specifically is that Ada, due to her charm power, which again is really omnipotence, it forces people to love her, making true human connection impossible. That is why Sumire has the oh shit look on her face when Boruto says, well, if she has other options, why is it gotta be Kawaki? It wasn't just Sumire saying, no, Boruto's my thing. That was her going, okay, wait a second, I understand why the girl's struggling now. She saw right through Ada's loneliness and correctly guessed what Ada wanted herself, real authentic love and relationships. And when you look at the chapter, Ada is drawn, looking down, looking sad. That was Ikimoto telling us that Ada agreed with Sumire's assessment, that Ada didn't want the kind of love that Omnipotence forces. And that basically doubled down on why she was pissed off at Amado, because she tells Code, Amado robbed me of the chance to feel ordinary love. Again, another chapter where people were pissed off about why is this so dialogue heavy? Why isn't things moving faster? That's what we call setup for delayed payoff. Ada wanted love that was chosen. She first said it in chapter 56, and then she says it again. In this case, it's Sumire saying it in chapter 73. A subtle reminder for the readers, hey, this is important. So Ada, at that moment in time, she used that Senrigan to watch the scene. In the present time, she's drawn looking sad, drawn looking vulnerable, and for the first time, probably in her life, she realized that there was somebody out there who truly understood her without ever having to meet her. That was one of my favorite Sumire moments ever. I meme Sumire on thumbnails when I find it appropriate, but I do truly enjoy her character, and it's because of shit like this. That moment mattered because it planted a seed in Ada's subconscious. Sumire had seen her for who she truly was, a teenage girl cursed by her own power. And for Ada, for the first time in her life, she truly felt seen. That emotional resonance is what you can point to as being that moment that Ada's subconscious began to start singling out Sumire. But you might say, what about Sarada? Well, here's the thing. Even if Ada didn't consciously think about it, because deep down she desired friends who wouldn't be affected by her charm, she first saw in Sumire somebody that understood her and she could be friends with. This is writing very similar to what Kubo did in Bleach. Not everything was directly spoon-fed, spelled out. Things like Ichigo's Quincy legacy and heritage, a lot of that was done indirectly. It wasn't directly told to us until right when the reveal happened, but the signs were all there. So when you look at Sarada, why Sarada was made immune makes a ton more sense when you realize that Ada was able to watch things with her Senrigan. So let's get into why Sarada is immune. So after this scene in chapter 73, it's important to remember that we are told that it's going to take Ada and Damon and Amato a few days to get to Konoha. So they had time to prepare, kick the people out the condo that Team 7's in, and basically Ada had a lot of time to basically watch what we would call Boruto Part 1 and go over all the different interactions because of how her Senrigan works. That's plenty of time for her to reflect with her Senrigan, meaning she probably looked into Sumire's life and then saw that moment where Sumire's asking Sarada, does she really like Boruto? And then she's like, wait a second, Sarada looks funny here. And then she probably zeroed in on Sarada and saw the same thing, that Sarada was secretly in love with Boruto, just like Sumire, which it makes sense. Again, Sumire said it was always obvious to anyone with eyes. That is why Mitsuki asked her, hey, you like Boruto, right? That is why in the Academy novels that Kodachi wrote and that Kodachi oversaw, Chocho flat out tells Sarada, you act differently when you're around Boruto, and it's not just because you guys are friends. So suddenly, Ada, in this moment, she had a revelation. Here are two girls close to her in age, because Ada's 16 at that point. They're 4 years apart in age. That happens. She found two girls close in her age who understood what it felt like to be in love with someone who was out of their reach. They weren't worshiping her. They weren't chasing her attention. They were, for the first time, real people to her. So when Ada finally meets Sarada and Sumire and she tries to talk to Sarada in chapter 76, she specifically focuses in on conversation about Boruto to try to get Sarada to open up. Subconsciously, she had already made them immune at that point. She's trying to talk to them about being in love with somebody when they shouldn't be able to do it when they are in her presence. That is such a telling moment. Sarada's shy, flustered, and refuses to open up, and that's why Ada looks hurt when she says, oh, I'm only enchanted by you. That sadness wasn't vanity, it was longing. She wanted a true connection. She wanted these two girls to see her as a normal teenage girl, not like a goddess. And that's when the subconscious of Ada was on full display here. She wanted genuine friends. She looked hurt when she realized she didn't have them. And the best part about that, it's a poetic moment. The very power that made Ada feel lonely is the same power that ultimately gave her companionship. It nullified itself for the people that she wanted to connect with the most. After Kawaki, they were the two people she wanted to bond with the most. Ironically, Omnipotence, Ada's curse, might have done the best thing for Ada's heart. And she couldn't have asked for two better people to be able to make a complete bond with, because again, Sarada and Sumire were not the only girls in Konoha that were clearly falling for Boruto and Kawaki. Reread part 1. Now, this is where, to further cement this, we have to stress something huge, which is that the charm effect and Omnipotence in terms of the memory swap, they're the same thing. So let's clear up that biggest misconception in the fandom that I have seen for 3 years now. Ada's charm power and memory reversal that swap Boruto and Kawaki's lives, they're not two different techniques. They are both byproducts of Omnipotence. One affects the emotions, the other affects the memories, the perception, if you will, but they are both from the same source itself. I'm going to use a very simple comparison. I'm not even going to use a jutsu comparison, because when I tried to explain Rasen Shuriken is basically an evolution of the wind release for Rasengan, it went over a lot of people's heads based on what I read in the comment section, because people think that Rasen Shuriken is the only wind release for Rasengan when Naruto has multiple wind release for Rasengan. So I'm just going to use the most simple real world explanation. Comparing the charm effect and the memory swap is like looking at a jab to a right hook. They are two different forms, but ultimately, what are they? They are a punch. The charm made people fall in love with Ada. The memory swap made people think that Kawaki was Naruto's son and that Boruto was the outsider. The same jutsu, just a different direction of impact. Just like a hook and a punch, a straight line punch are two different directions, but they're ultimately still a punch. So both originate from omnipotence. Ada subconsciously excluded Sarada and Sumire from it. That immunity applies to both events because it is the same jutsu being used. They were already immune to omnipotence via that charm effect. But the fact that they're immune to omnipotence is why their memories were not altered. That's why they remembered Boruto's true identity when everyone else's memories were rewritten. Ada didn't turn it off for them manually. She simply wanted friends she couldn't control. And omnipotence, being a slave to her emotions, obeyed her and made them immune from omnipotence in general. That, again, extends to the memory. You could say that omnipotence is like that super clingy ex that always listens to what you say out loud. They're always looking at your Instagram stories. They're always liking your photos, and you can never truly shake them. If that sounds too personal, it's because it is. Now, let's go a step further here. Let's look at Momoshiki's warning and why knowing about omnipotence does not save you. So, Momoshiki drove this home in Boruto Naruto Next Generation Chapter 80. When he tells Boruto that omnipotence cannot be undone, he says, this is not genjutsu. In other words, even when you realize that reality's been rewritten, you can't fight it. Sasuke again is proof of that. He knew the timeline didn't make sense. He saw contradictions. Hey, why do you have a scar over your eye? Why do you have Momoshiki's chakra? Why do you have my headband? Well, that's weird. In my mind, Kawaki is Naruto's son, but hey, I'm going to trust in my daughter. It's because his memories were being overridden. He says it himself. The more that things are supposed to bother him, the less that they do. He had to find another anchor to hold on to. His anchor was Sarada saying, believe in Boruto. That is why Sarada and Sumire's immunity is a big deal. They didn't resist the power. They were never touched with it to begin. This was, at the end of the day, a very subtle setting up. Like, the closest anime thing that I can compare this to is, and I know some of you guys have not read Bleach, but I go back to it. This really reminds me of how there were all these subtle signs sprinkled throughout Bleach's manga that Ichigo was really part Quincy, and that Zangetsu that he was dealing with wasn't the true Zanpakuto spirit that he was supposed to be interacting with. But the story never directly spoon-fed it to you. It dropped all these breadcrumbs. That is why avid Bleach readers such as myself always point out that Bleach's storytelling is very indirect and it's not as straightforward as what the other two members of the Big Three did. So that being Naruto, which spoon-fed a lot, and One Piece, which it uses subtle writing too, but for the most part, One Piece spoon-feeds quite a bit. And I do think that's where some of the disconnect with Ikimoto's writing style comes into place, because Boruto being a sequel to Naruto, which that's not just me saying it's spoon-fed. Naruto's original editor, Yahigi, basically said the reason why Naruto was as popular as it was in the West is because it doesn't require high reading comprehension skills. Not to say that there's no depth in Naruto, there is, but they purposely dumbed down and spoon-fed a lot because they were targeting Western fans once they realized the popularity in the West. And Ikimoto, as the lead writer right now, there's a bit of a departure there because the writing style is different. He uses more of a subtle approach. He doesn't do what One Piece does. And to restate, as somebody that is an avid One Piece reader, I will tell you without hesitation, when it comes to writing, One Piece is a lot more subtle than Naruto ever was. He doesn't do what Naruto did. It's more akin to, again, what you saw with Bleach. Bleach didn't do that. Boruto, by extension, walks more of that line. It drops breadcrumbs and it forces you to read in between the lines. And it is not going to fully explain everything, because the author is just expecting you to be able to connect dots. All these small seeds that were planted here, they do wonders for Ada's character, which that now brings me into the character theme for Ada and the emotional depth. Here's why that matters. What makes all of this work is how human it is. It is one of the reasons why I would die on the hill and say, when it comes to capturing female emotions, Ikimoto does a better job than Kishimoto. And I don't think Kishimoto would disagree with me on that assessment. Ada might be a walking goddess of beauty, but her biggest flaw, it is deeply relatable. She just wants real love. She wants real connections. We as human beings, we spend our whole lives looking for connections with people. We were never meant to be alone. That is why back in the day there were clans. That is why back in the day when people were in caves, they still stuck in tribes and etc. Man was never meant to be alone. Some people spend their entire lives looking for their better half. The ancient Greeks referred to it as a twin flame, that basically everyone had a soulmate and that everyone searched for their twin flame, the person that completed them. Ada is a 16-year-old girl in part 1. She is cursed to make everyone adore her, but no one ever means it. It is tragic. It is lonely. And if you've ever been in high school surrounded by fake people, which I know that applies to some of you guys watching this video are in high school, you know exactly how that feels. You know when people are just putting up with you because they have no choice to, or you know when people are putting up with you and they're not being sincere. Imagine going through that every waking moment of your life. You will go crazy. Sarada and Sumire, they are the antidote to that loneliness. They represent authenticity. Girls who do not worship Ada, they do not envy her. They're not catfighting with her. And let's be honest, now that everything has been worked out, they have an opportunity to gossip about their crushes like any teenagers. And we've already seen that they do gossip about their crushes. In a way, Ada's subconscious was doing the very thing that every teenage girl does when she meets people who get her. She opened up, and those people open up to her. In Ada's case, her emotions, they basically rewrote reality itself. When some fans say, hey, this makes no sense, remember, omnipotence does not follow logic. It follows emotion. Ada did not break the rules of omnipotence with this. She literally fulfills them perfectly. She wanted love, so people became love slaves to her. She wanted friendship. She wanted connection, and her heart, her subconscious, made it happen with Sarada and with Sumire. And the beauty is that they formed that bond in spite of that, because she wanted them immune from omnipotence, but they formed the friendship themselves. That, in my opinion, is what makes this one of the best written and most human moments in Boruto. It's something that's going to go underappreciated because a lot of fans do not care for the character writing that is done here, especially because it's leaning more so into the emotions of the heart. But Naruto's manga told us repeatedly, a shinobi brings out their true power when they have something in someone that they love. This is just building on that concept. So the next time someone tells you Sarada and Sumire's immunity doesn't make sense at all, tell them first, watch this video, then tell them go reread chapter 73, pay attention to the Sumire scene, then reread chapter 76, pay attention to the Sarada and Ada scene, and then reread Boruto 2 Blue Vortex chapter 26 and 27, that whole conversation with Sarada, Sumire, and Ada, and then ask them this: when a power is fueled by emotion, what happens when the person who wields it just wants a friend? That's how omnipotence really works. And that's how Ada, without even realizing it, freed herself from her own curse. Obviously, if you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing, clicking here on the left to check out that chapter review, or click here on the right to check out that My Dress Up Darling video that I mentioned earlier.